Welcome to Governance Bites. I'm Mark Banicevich, and I'm very lucky today to spend more time with Kate Vennell. Thank you very much, Kate.
Thanks, Mark. Yeah.
Kate is a chartered member of the Institute of Directors, a very experienced director. She's currently sitting on 5 boards. The first is as an independent director of Lifetime, which is a large financial advice business in New Zealand. She's a board trustee of Auckland Philharmonia, which actually involves 2 boards. And she's the she's the deputy chair of both Mindful Money and the Diabetes Foundation of Aotearoa. So a balance of both for-profit and not-for-profit. A background with legal and general in the UK with about 14 years at that company, which is a FTSE 100 company and actually the 10th largest asset manager by assets under management in the world, according to Wikipedia. So a very, very large business, a lot of that through pension funds, you were saying, right?
Yeah.
And in that business, over that career, Kate spent time including as commercial finance director for life insurance and also as head of investor relations. And it's in that latter role that we had our first conversation around investor relations, and today we want to talk a little bit more about other stakeholders.
Yeah.
So again, Kate, thank you very much for your time.
Yes.
Really enjoy this angle. It's something quite different from what I've done in the past on this channel, podcast, conversation.
Right.
It's really just me catching up with people I like. So
yeah, that's great. You seem to be
conversation.
covering a really diverse set of interesting topics. So
It's been good
Yeah.
fun, and
Yeah.
I'm really enjoying it. So hopefully you're getting some value out of this too. But last time we met, we discussed the voice of shareholders in the boardroom, and we want to talk today about the voice of other stakeholders.
Yeah.
Are they relevant, and what other groups of stakeholders should be considered?
yeah, totally relevant. If anything, possibly more relevant, in that all these other stakeholders are what are essential to making this entity thrive. So absolutely important. And I would start with customers as absolutely number one. Yes, to a degree, that's the role of management, but I think it is also valuable for board to get insights into customers, particularly the slow-running trends that might be emerging, demographic changes. I think it's just so important as a strategic input, but also ultimately, if your customers aren't happy, your profits are going to fall. So, a good thriving company has got happy customers getting great outcomes, and those are growing, and success. And I think we're both in financial services. We've got the new outcomes focus of the regulator. I think really getting insights into are our customers getting the right outcomes is going to become increasingly important for financial services boards.
Which is really just giving the board direction on what they should be doing anyway, because as you say, if you don't have customers, you don't have a company.
Exactly.
You've got to start,
exactly.
yeah.
And I think what's interesting in this world of ours is that trends can emerge slowly over time, and then suddenly you realise you're in a different world. And we all have to keep abreast of that. The other group that's obviously super important is employees, because without employees doing the mahi, again, you don't have that entity. And employees are providing diminishing life capital. So again, if they're not happy, they'll vote with their feet, or they'll check out, and that creating that great culture and making sure that your employees are really feeling part of this purpose and bought in, but also understanding the need to kind of keep driving the health of the entity, and that they're supporting that. Yeah.
In many ways, employees are your most volatile asset, right?
Potentially, yeah.
And probably your most valuable.
Yes.
And if you look after them and they stay, life is good. And if,
Yeah.
as you say, if you have a poor culture and you get some turnover of employees, every employee you have to recruit costs money.
Yep.
Training them
Yep.
costs a lot of
That's
money,
right.
and they're unproductive in their first few months.
Yes.
So retaining
Yeah.
the best employees and keeping them growing
right.
is very, very
I
important.
really feel so. Yeah, and then you've got regulators. Now, clearly, I'm coming from a regulated industry by and large. So, I think really understanding what the regulators' objectives are, what they're currently concerned about, and that's through formal and informal sort of briefings. Like we were talking about the fans conference and, speeches by regulators. Keeping abreast of that's also really important for directors, because that's the operating environment in which you're running this entity.
Right, you've got to learn
Yeah.
your swimming lanes.
You've got to learn your swimming lanes.
And as you say, financial
Yeah.
services is an industry that's become very regulated, and rightly so.
Yeah.
But all industries have some degree of regulation.
That's right.
So yes,
That's
a
right.
regulator is a very
Yeah.
important.
And depending on what sort of entity and where you are, there's also social license. and reputation and influences. So it's harder to manage. It's a lot harder to manage, but keeping an eye on, are we maintaining our social license? Are we operating well ethically? Are we upholding high standards? What is our impact on our direct local community, our wider community? Are we contributing long run to better outcomes for society? I think all of these are really important, because if you don't manage them, your reputation will suffer and ultimately it will have a financial impact.
Yes, society and community, as you say, is a very interesting stakeholder, because it's quite hard to get the voice, isn't it?
It is hard to get the voice. I mean, you'll get some of that through media, watching influencers, but again, you do have to watch a little bit that you're not taking the wrong.
And you know, if you're getting media attention, usually it's for doing something wrong.
Unfortunately,
right? So
it is.
You want to try and keep on top of that in a positive way.
Yeah.
And this whole move, or really awareness of environmental, social governance issues is bringing that to prominence, isn't it?
Yeah, I think so.
So hopefully we'll get a trend of companies that are far more interested in doing the right thing.
Yeah.
And research shows that companies that do the right thing perform better.
I think so, because if you do the right thing, then you're probably serving a really important need, and you're probably therefore growing, and it's all just a virtuous circle, in my view.
Yeah, right. So we've talked about 4 different groups really: customers, employees, the regulators, and the community.
Yeah.
How do you gather the voices of those groups?
Yeah, so I think again, for a board, having some formal processes around this is super helpful. So customer insight, you might get a satisfaction survey and you might have some score on a scorecard, but I think you need to actually go deeper. You also need customer insight reporting. And so that is expecting your management to be running formally insight analysis, which is both using your own internal data, but also using sometimes focus groups to try to get deeper. One risk I see, it's a kind of risk and benefit. A director might have some personal experience with the entity, and that can be really powerful because nothing gives you information like your own experience.
Yes.
But I just caution that can often be misleading too, because as a director you are not usually representative of the typical customer. And I think of a lot of financial services entities I've been part of, you know, the directors are older people who've already got their financial, circumstances well organised. And so they're coming from a perspective of usually, some security. They don't really understand what it's like to be, heavily indebted, financially insecure, struggling to make ends meet. And so you do need that breadth of the insight.
Okay, so for customers, we can survey them, we can do focus groups, you've got insights from your own data, you can see your churn of customers, your retention, that kind of thing can be really good metrics.
Yeah.
How about it for employees?
For employees, well, again, you can run, formal annual engagement surveys, and you do that either yourself or hire external experts. They can be really powerful. Often the kind of qualitative quotes can be as insightful as the actual scores. I also think it's quite valuable to do a little bit of walking the floor, before meetings, trying to attend some company events too, so that there's an opportunity to have some direct contact with employees. Again, being cautious in that those employees who may seek to speak to you may have a particular axe to grind or just be the most extrovert. But you can get a sense of the culture just by walking the floor and trying to sort of assess the state of the environment. Yeah.
A little bit harder these days with the trends to work from home in many cases. The events then may be a really good place to gauge that.
I think so. And having events where it is possible for directors to come together with employees.
That's really interesting. The regulator, I guess, to some extent, depending on the nature of the business, quite often regulators are open to conversation, right?
They are, and I think you can gather, because they're doing a lot of things in a very transparent way, you can gather the insights and intelligence through the formal speeches that they do, the media releases that they're doing, the conferences in the sector. And what I think as a board you need is for all that to be collated, and that it is a regular calendarised agenda item, whether it's in a risk and compliance committee, but actually at the board level as well, that you are seeing all of that, as well as political changes and all the rest of it. And I think in New Zealand we do benefit from that actually ability to be able to meet these people, go to events where they're there.
Yes.
We've got some great organisations in the financial services sector which are also collating consultations, and I think participating in that and being an active contributor to all of that is a thing that's part of the social licence, actually.
Yeah, we are very lucky in New Zealand to have, particularly in our industry, to have quite open regulators and have quite easy conversations.
Yeah.
There, I'm sure, are both industries and certainly in many other countries, particularly when they're so much larger.
Yes.
Not so easy to pick up the phone and talk to the right person at the regulator, but that's where the conferences and things will become so very important.
That's right. Yeah, I mean, I remember at Legal in General, it was almost like only certain people were authorised to speak to the regulator because it was so formal. And in quite a strong enforcement regime and all the rest of it, and I remember the Financial Conduct Authority has a very different approach to regulating its population than the Financial Markets Authority. Of course, the population is so much bigger. Yeah, that's right.
But they have got at least they did last time I looked, a desire to have contact with every entity in their population at least once every 4 years.
Yes.
And the larger entities, it would be more regular, and the smaller entities, it might be a phone call once every 4 years. But that was a really interesting approach, which means that even there, in such a large entity, you're still getting a conversation with the regulator. But as you say, particularly as entities get larger, they kind of restrict who can talk.
Yes.
Yeah, very much. And how about society? The hard one, how do we get the voice of society?
Yeah, well, I think you need to have someone in your organisation whose job it is, and you maybe now with artificial intelligence as well, you can be scooping up every time your entity is mentioned.
Yes.
And you can then do some analysis on that, so you can pick up the sort of sentiment analysis. And depending on your entity, when I was a trustee for a large concert venue in London, we actually gathered people together in a focus group, community users.
Yes.
And it's very challenging because they're very diverse. But actually the focus group workshop method worked pretty well because we could kind of gather that diversity and just listen and hear where their challenges were, what they liked about the concert venue, all of those things.
Right. Actually, that does bring me on to my next question, which is about not-for-profit.
Yeah.
Because the sorts of things we've talked about so far are actually quite resource intensive.
Yeah, they are resource intensive.
It'd be lovely to be able to, engage somebody to get the sentiment from your employees and from the industry and from your customers and so forth. But a not-for-profit can struggle with that. So what additional, are there any additional stakeholders you need to consider? But then secondly, what challenges exist to gathering the voices?
Yeah, well, I think, beneficiaries. So, the core purpose of being a trustee is to know the purpose of your trust and who you're serving. And that's your legal obligation, and that's your number one legal obligation, and then obviously staying financially solvent to deliver that. So I really feel getting close to your beneficiaries is essential. And that, you're right, it can sometimes be more challenging for an entity like an orchestra. You can actually go to the events. I can go out to the community and be part of the activities happening, so I can get a sense firsthand of what's happening, and I think that is really important. It's also really great fuel, because getting closer to your beneficiaries, if you're in a health charity or something that's involved with the community, getting close to the lived experience and the actual challenges of your beneficiaries powers your motivation so much. It reminds you why you're doing all of this stuff for free, why you may have the odd sleepless night, all the rest of it. It's a big responsibility, but seeing those beneficiaries and how they're benefiting from the organisation just really powers you, but also reminds you of keeping that as the centre of your focus.
Yes.
So I think that's number one. And you're right, challenging to, if you can, and you can be part of events where they're part of, that's great. Focus groups, I think, if you can, are probably more powerful than necessarily lots of data gathering.
Yes.
And they can be reasonably easy to organise. Or just events where your beneficiaries can come along and you can actually get that insight.
And even surveys these days with tools like SurveyMonkey become very easy too.
That is true, and I've run some quite small charities in the UK where we were doing SurveyMonkey just ourselves. Yeah, it is helpful.
Pretty straightforward.
Yeah.
In many ways, one of the advantages that a smaller entity has, even if we look back to a profit-making entity, is they're a lot closer to their customers, right? There's not as many layers between
I think that's true.
Governance and the conversation.
Yeah, that's true. The other really big important stakeholder group that you have for a not-for-profit is your funders. And you know, you'll have a range of funders. Most charities, particularly in New Zealand, have probably got one or two major grant funders. And they're pretty important to make sure that you're keeping abreast of their strategy. What do they want to achieve as a foundation or a grant-giving entity? Often they're connected to government or local government. So what are their objectives? You've got to be cautious that you don't end up being driven too much by those objectives, but you do have to have visibility of, are you delivering? Are you delivering the outcomes that those grant funders want? And I think you can now, there's more formalised reporting, producing an impact report and having clear impact KPIs is really best practice. Also now most charities are having to produce statement of service performance reports. So that all of those things pull up the need to have clear outcome KPIs and to consider where they overlap and meet the needs of your grant funders, but also to be able to give those grant funders your formal impact reporting. Some of them will have their own processes.
And that will also be true of sponsors, right? And one
that's right.
As you say, making sure that you're not driven too much by what they want. Sponsors would be even more so in that space. Yeah. And making sure that you've got a sponsor that aligns with your values. And
that's right.
It's a very big challenge for not-for-profit. You need money, but sometimes you might have to say no. You
might have to say no, and I think you do need to have some clear policies around that. You don't, if you're an organisation, I mean, obvious example, you know, your mission is asthma. You would not want a sponsor who's anything connected to tobacco, you know, in any way. Now that's a really obvious and probably not going to happen example at the extreme end, but you do have to consider who are our sponsors. What is their reputation? Do we want to saddle our brand up to theirs? All of that. Behind a lot of the grant funders, I mentioned politics. And I think increasingly a charity trustee has to consider where's the political risk in this, especially when funding is coming through government, maybe a service contract or direct grant, or it's coming through local government. Politics is ever shifting. Right. And so you actually do need your chief executive and possibly your chair to be actually meeting the politicians and keeping abreast of where their thinking is. And
in terms of the ongoing needs of the organisation, that sort of funding can dry up very suddenly.
It can dry up.
And when you're a cornerstone funder, you've got a real issue, so you do have to keep on top of it.
You do have to keep on top of it and just have a risk management strategy around it.
Yes. That's a very key point.
Yeah.
Moving back to the corporate world, we have this new section 131 subsection 5 of the Companies Act, which enables, doesn't change the priority of acting in the best interests of the company, but it does enable the director to rely on or use information around environmental social governance or other stakeholders and take that into account. How does the board balance these various demands and perspectives in decision making?
Well, I personally feel that actually nothing's changed. It was already, as you say, the best interests duty, acting in the best interests of the company in the long term, wanting it to be a sustainable entity in the sense of it's sustaining itself. You would want to consider these things. I've never seen it as something that you put on the sort of top of the cake or you consider when you've taken care of everything else. It's just core. It's core. All of this stuff, the environmental considerations, the social license, the governance, it's just all risk management. It's risk management, it's meeting the needs of your customers, it's keeping your social license, it's having great governance because that's going to lead to great performance. So I don't really understand, and I know there's a backlash in the US around this. I don't really understand why a good company wouldn't just have this front and centre, you know. And you can see, and I've done a lot of research connected with mindful money, when companies don't pay attention to this stuff, it hits their bottom line.
Yes.
I mean, a great example is Credit Suisse, you know, major Swiss bank that just had really bad conduct, really bad business ethics, poor governance, and eventually it had to be bailed out by the Swiss government and put under UBS. It basically collapsed.
Yes.
And investors were deserting it. Its share price was falling. New CEOs were brought in, but they couldn't turn around the culture. And it's basically decades of not paying attention to good governance, the social outcomes of what they were doing, whose money it was they were taking, and effectively, all of that. So, that's a really visible example of when you do ESG badly, it will eventually lead to the destruction of your entity.
Okay, so as you suggest, to act in the best interest of the company is a separate legal entity. It has a long life. It's not. There are some companies set up for vehicles for short terms, but ultimately a company, you want it to exist into the future. So you have to consider the current and future needs of your company, of your customer rather. And as we've talked about before, employee satisfaction, good employees, good culture drives great business. And if you're not doing the right things by society, you end up on the front page with some bad things going on.
You do.
You're not the first person that said to me that Section 131.5 isn't really necessary, because if you're doing the right thing under Section 131, the duty to act in the best interests of the company, then you will be looking at all these things anyway.
I think you will. I mean, it's not unhelpful to remind everybody, but actually now most global investors are kind of expecting companies to step up and manage this, and they'll be overseeing it and holding companies to account through stewardship and engagement, or by investment decisions to divest or to increase or reduce holdings. So I think it's just BAU now.
That's fantastic. Well, I've got one final question for you. Given your extensive experience as a director, what advice would you give to somebody starting out?
My first bit of advice would be to really look at what your motivations and passions and what it is you want to give your energy to. Whether it's unpaid not-for-profit or paid, you're going to be giving a lot to this, and it's a lot of responsibility. So there needs to be that, you need to be motivated about it, and something that's going to, you really feel that you can add value through your expertise and insights, and that you're going to have that time and passion to devote. So that's the first consideration.
So an alignment of values will drive your motivation, and also the knowledge or belief that you will add value to this entity.
I think that is really important. The days of sort of being a passenger trustee or a passenger director have gone. So, you are there to do a serious job, and really being up for that and understand. And then that's the next point, is understanding what that job is. So I think getting close to what is this organisation's purpose, how is it set up with its constitution and its trustee, what is its strategy, is starting to think about those opportunities and risks. And then the third most important thing is really just being a sponge for knowledge. And podcasts like this are great. You're providing that really short, sharp, focused insight, as well as all the great training that's available through organisations like the Institute of Directors. And what I've really observed in New Zealand is how open experienced directors are to meeting up for a coffee.
I found that. This is evidence.
But I really benefited when I first came back to New Zealand 4 years ago from the number of people who were happy to have a coffee with me, do a video call, whatever, and just share their insights, sometimes often quite openly about where they had challenges, and all the rest of that. I think never hesitate. In Aotearoa, people are so giving. And have that confidence to pick up the LinkedIn message and just sort of, ask for help. Yeah,
that's really great advice. You're absolutely right. And so far, I've done 40, 45, close to 50 of these interviews. Most of the people I've interviewed so far have been people that I've already known. We met when you first returned to New Zealand about 4 years ago. There have been some that I've met purely for the opportunity to interview them like this. And so many people have said, no problem at all, I'd love to do it. So it's, you're lucky. We are in a very good country to reach out to people and just ask for help.
Yeah, definitely.
But I think the key thing there, and so your second point was get in and understand the company, or the entity you're a director or trustee of, know its strategy, know its purpose, and look at previous board minutes, understand what's going on. But the second part is learn your job as a director and continue to learn in that role. I've said a number of times that one of the ironies I think in this country is that it's so easy to be a director. You know, you can start a company in 10 minutes and become a director and not even know what the job is.
That's
so
true.
do make sure that you know your duties, get into it, as you say, watch some videos or listen to some podcasts, get some training from the Institute of Directors or Governance New Zealand and find the role.
Definitely. And I think there's higher risks in the charity space too, where people maybe are a little naive as to what the responsibilities are. And so, it's important as well. And there are lots of great resources, and specifically for charity governors as well.
Yeah, there's some great resources for sports people as well.
Yeah,
Sport New Zealand has got a free governance course.
Yeah.
I even recommend people that are directors of smaller companies, if you want to get some training and not pay for it, go to Sport New Zealand. That's free on the website.
I think you're right. They're an organisation doing a lot to lift standards and not-for-profit.
Yeah. Well, Kate, thank you very much again for your time. It's been lovely to catch up again.
Yeah, thank you, Mark. I really enjoyed it.
I look forward to seeing you again too.
Definitely.
And see you next episode.
Yeah, ka kite.
Thank you for watching this episode of Governance Bites. We have more episodes on YouTube and your favourite podcast channel, where I interview directors and experts on various topics relating to boards of directors and governance. We'd love to see you back, and please like, subscribe, and share the videos and podcasts.